as we emerge from the pandemic. Thank you again to everyone for joining us today. I would like to just make a couple of very quick special shout outs. First of all, to Congressman Lalota, thank you for being with us. He's in the back of the room. I thought you were going to sit up front, but thank you for briefly telling your story. It sounds like his wife is an athlete who said you must be here, so we're thrilled. Also, it was great to hear from Representative Cheryl a few minutes ago, and I just returned from a very inspiring meeting with Representative Sanchez, and if you don't know her, you should look her up. Representative Sanchez of California is going to make history on June 14th when she's going to be the first woman coach of the Congressional baseball game that has been in place for 113 years. So women can coach men. Certainly, she's elected by someone, the previous captain who was holding that position, and he's thought she was the best coach to lead the team. And I told her that she can be like a Supreme Court judge and just stay in that position forever. I also want to give a couple more shout outs. With us today, we have our WSF board chair and the executive director of the Ivy League, Robin Harris. We have our trustee and legendary Notre Dame women's basketball coach, Muffet McGraw. We have Paralympic medalist, two-time Paralympian in Rio and Tokyo, Sophie Herzog-Gibb. We're glad your flight is canceled so you can join in. We have Gabby Vincent, I believe, here, right, from recently retired from Washington Spirit, our hometown team here in DC as part of the National Men's Soccer League. And we want to honor their franchise and Michelle King, who is an amazing owner that's leading the way in gender equity within NWSL. We also had Ariel Atkins, again, one of your hometown heroes from the Mystics, joining us this morning for the Congressional meetings. And another shout out to Washington Mystics and their amazing owner, Sheila Johnson, both women entrepreneurs who are leading the way in gender equity outside of sport. And it's now my pleasure, without further ado, to introduce Sarah Axelson, who is WSF's Vice President of Advocacy, and she will be moderating today's panel. Take it away, Sarah.
Excellent. Thank you, Olga. Hi, everyone. And hello to those on the live stream. Our apologies for the glitch this morning, but I hear we are officially live and in action. Thank you, and shout out to the WSF team who makes all of this possible day in and day out. It's not just me and Olga. That team that we have is special and does a ton of great work to make all of this happen. So really pleased to have you all with us today. I want to get to this conversation, and apologies that I'm not sitting at the table with you, but here we go. Introductions of our fantastic panelists. We have, right next to me, Anna Johannes, 2012 Paralympic bronze medalist in the 4x100 meter medley and Adaptive Sports New England board member. To her right, we have Meghan Duggan, WSF President, three-time Olympic medalist in ice hockey, including gold in 2018 and seven-time world champion, currently serving as the Director of Player Development for the New Jersey Devils in the NHL. To her right, we have Courtney Gano, a professional softball player, mother, and advocate, a former University of Washington standout, Team USA member, and experienced NPF and Athletes Unlimited professional athlete. To her right, we have Kimora Williams, a sophomore lacrosse student athlete at Howard University and a sports management major. And last but certainly not least, we have Angel McCoughtry, one of the most decorated WNBA stars of all time, future first ballot Hall of Famer, 2-time Olympic gold medalist, #1 draft pick, Rookie of the Year, 5-time All-Star, 6-time WNBA team, 2-time scoring champ, 2-time steals leader, 8-time All WNBA defensive team. Welcome. I'm just really thankful I didn't have to memorize that. So we're all here today. Olga started. We're here today for National Girls and Women in Sports Day, and really had the benefit of having so many meetings this morning with staff and members to talk about the importance of sports. And these athletes are testaments to the benefits that sport provide, not only the health benefits, but the education, the leadership, the academic benefits, social emotional learning that our athletes receive. And while we can use our elite athletes as the example, we know that even kids who never make it to the most elite stage still get tremendous benefit from sport. And that is why the Women's Sports Foundation does the work that we do and are so passionate about making sure that all girls and all women have access to sport to reap those lifelong benefits. So this past June, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of Title IX, and we've made such great progress, but we also know that we're not done yet and that there is so much work to be done to truly reach gender equity in sports. And so as it relates to women's sports, right, the growth of women's sports, we know at its core there is so much advocacy that has happened over the years to really allow women's sports to reach the level that it is today, and that will require to reach the level where we know we can go in women's sports. So I'm curious for each of you to really kick us off and kick off this conversation. What does the legacy of advocacy mean to you in women's sports, and how are you personally contributing to this and continuing that legacy?
Angel, you're up with that long resume. You go.
Oh man, I got put in the spot. What was the first one again?
It's the legacy of advocacy in women's sports and how you're continuing that.
Yeah, I think, there's power in numbers with us. You see all these powerful women up here. I think the more we continue to advocate.
Testing. Oh. The more we continue to advocate and use our voices, the more evolution we see. I always say that women's sports is like evolution. Men's sports is pretty much set where they are, but to continue to watch the evolution of us and to watch us grow, it's really a beautiful thing. Just what Billie Jean King did, and how she spoke, and just how far women's tennis have come, and what we're doing with all of our sports. So I think just our voices and the power in our numbers.
Yeah, I love the challenge, love the responsibility of it. All of us in this room sitting up here today, our relationship with WSF, subsequently with, we'll talk about her all day, Billie Jean King, right? She gets introduced by the one and only. Imagine her resume. And so I think about, the responsibility every single day and the passion and commitment to carrying on work that she started, right? Or that so many other fearless leaders in the advocacy space started years ago. Myself personally, all of us sitting up here, I was a benefactor of Title IX. I was a benefactor of that legislation. I earned a Division I scholarship to a university where I got an unbelievable education, excellent coaching to propel a Team USA career. That was because of Title IX. That was because of women like Billie Jean King. And now, here we sit today with the responsibility of we're not done yet. There's still so much work to be done when you think about the gap between opportunities that boys and men have versus girls and women have in sport. And so it's a responsibility, it's a challenge, but it's one I gladly inhale every single day because it's our duty, and it's exciting. And I have a young daughter. She's 1 year old. And, I hope when she's playing sports or 50 years from now, what her life looked like and what she had access to is that much further ahead. So it's an exciting challenge to take on every day, the advocacy work.
Kimora, what about you as a student athlete? I'm curious your perspective.
I believe representation is key. I believe women's sports are underrepresented, and that differs us from how we can potentially play. if you look at men's basketball, their stadiums are packed, or football, their stadiums are packed, and that affects how you play. So I believe the more fan base, social media platforms that we're able to get out there and showcase our talent on will definitely help us grow in women's sports.
Courtney, I know the Athletes Unlimited model is a new model, and certainly I think is helping to change the landscape for women's sports. I'm curious your reflections about how that model can kind of translate into propelling us forward to the next 50 years.
Yeah, if you're not familiar with Athletes Unlimited, we have 4 different women's sports. We have softball, women's lacrosse, women's basketball, and women's volleyball. And the setup is a little bit different. It's almost like I compare it to like fantasy softball. So there's a point system, and there's you're 1 through 60, and depending on your points and whatnot. And so it's definitely a different concept. We are player ran, so we don't have coaches. We have a player executive committee of 4 or 5 that make the decisions for us. We all play for a cause, every single one of the softball players. So 1 through 60, we get to choose a cause. Whatever our bonus is at the end of the year, 50% of that is matched to go towards a cause. So we're playing for something more than ourselves. And last year, we got a deal with ESPN as well as this year, and that was huge for visibility. The College World Series for softball has grown immensely, tremendously, and pro softball, there's still a lot of people that don't even know we have a professional league. So it's been really huge for us to finally have this platform to be able to show girls what they can do, whether that's playing softball professionally, whether it's coaching, and just knowing like, man, she did that, I can do it. And as a mother of a 2-year-old, I'm the only mom right now of all 60 women, and so I am really hoping that grows, and we have a lot of work to do, but we have a great policy put in place, a breastfeeding and pregnancy policy, which is huge. And we didn't have that before in our previous league. So there's a lot of growth, and there's a lot more growth that can happen.
Yeah, and can I add to that real quick? Yeah. When Athletes Unlimited was introduced on the basketball side, all the girls were so excited because it was a way for them to make income. After the WNBA is over, if they don't go overseas, they don't make income. So they're scratching and clawing to find something to do. But when that was introduced, just to see them light up, they were so excited. They was like, I don't have to go overseas. We all know the issues with Brittany Griner and just being overseas away from your family for 7-8 months. It's a long grind. So that really, really brought the light on their faces when you guys introduced. I just want to let you know that.
That's awesome. And I think we'll touch a little bit more on some of those parenting policies as well, because I think that it is really helping to change the narrative and push the narrative forward for sure. Anna, activism in sports.
Such a good question. Yeah, I think echoing everything that's been said, I think it's really about holding the door open is what advocacy really is, if I see someone go through, it's about that representation. But I think the power of the Women's Sports Foundation and the athletes that are involved is that you hold that door behind you. That door was open for you, but you hold it open so more people like you, marginalized communities, different things like that are also getting through, and that door's never going to close.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so as we look to holding the door open, right, and pushing forward, we just, as I mentioned earlier, in June, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of Title IX, and while we have made tremendous progress, we've seen absolute exponential growth in the participation of women and girls in high school and college sports. We know that the primary beneficiary of those opportunities have been suburban white girls, right? And so how do we continue the conversation to really make sure that we're reaching the most underserved, marginalized communities, whether it's girls of color, girls with disabilities, LGBTQ youth, to really make sure that everyone has access to those life-changing benefits of sports. So I'm curious, you don't all have to answer this, but if anyone wants to jump in, I'm curious to know, from your own perspectives, what can be done to kind of help push forward in those areas and in reaching the groups that thus far haven't been as well served by the law.
I'll jump in quick on a couple of things. I think, and I was here as part of the celebration of the 50th anniversary of Title IX when we talked about, we're not done yet and where does it need to go. And I think one of the biggest things, the main things is education around, what is Title IX, right? As I said earlier, I was a benefactor of Title IX, but I probably didn't even fully understand the scope of what it was, what it protected, who it applied to, until I was much older, like, embarrassingly, probably a couple years ago, right? And we sat last night, the group of us, we ran a clinic for about 50 or 60, local girls in all sorts of sports down at Howard University. And one of the questions I asked the whole group to start was, who knows what Title IX is, right? And these are young girls from the DC area, girls of color in the age group from, 8 to 13, and not one hand went up, right? And I wouldn't have at that age either. So just, the education piece I think is critical. And then I think other than that, what we talked about today in some of our meetings was compliance with Title IX, holding feet to the fire of some of these organizations that claim to be in compliant with Title IX, but they're finding loopholes, right? Or they don't have a compliance officer, and they're not really looking out for and protecting some of these, women and other groups. And so I think those would be two, huge steps. But I do think it starts with the education piece, because once, I said to a bunch of the girls when we were finishing up, I said, go home, go to school tomorrow, or talk to your teacher about Title IX. Hey, I learned this yesterday, and that spreads, right? And it raises awareness, and so I think that's a critical piece in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, two things to kind of flag for the Hill folks who are here in the room is that, we expect likely in June that the Gender Equity and Education Act will be reintroduced. So really would love and encourage you to check that out if your member hasn't co-sponsored in the past. Would appreciate support on that, and that would establish an Office of Gender Equity within the Department of Education and really giving renewed resources, but also to the point of education and awareness, the training for Title IX coordinators to actually understand the law. I think what we're seeing a lot of is that there is training for Title IX coordinators, but it is not necessarily focused on sports, right? And so you may have Title IX coordinators in place in schools who don't fully understand the intricacies of how Title IX applies to sports, and 50 years in, we shouldn't still be having the conversation of just how the law works, let alone making sure that people are complying with it. And in addition, we've had bills in the past looking to create transparency in high school sports, similar to what we have with the Equity and Athletics Disclosure Act at the collegiate level, bringing that down to the high school level, because right now there is no data transparency in that same way for the high school level. So looking for opportunities to shed more light, really just sunshine, right? What are the opportunities like? And then it allows us to advocate for more. Anna, I'm curious if you can speak a little bit more about your own experiences accessing sport, right? I think that this is one of the conversations that athletes with disabilities have been left out of the conversation, right? And have too often been left out of school sports in general. And so would love for you to kind of expound on that and talk about how we might be able to provide more opportunities and more gender equity within those opportunities for athletes with disabilities, and from a policy-making perspective, if you have any thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think to kind of build off of what you were saying, Megan, about what we can do is really the allyship and systemic change, which is easier said than done, obviously, right? But with disability, especially, and different marginalized community, it's all women, all sports. But once you start getting into disability, I was able to swim at the University of Louisville, go Cards. And so, but the only reason I was able to was because I was a volunteer coach. So I had to work on the side. I was going to school on the side, again, not even with the university, but I volunteered just to be on the team. So I had that opportunity, and I was lucky because of that opportunity. And so my success has been luck, and then kind of slipping through a system, through the cracks that were not meant to be there for me. And so by making sure that our policies are being equitable and just from the beginning ensures that, athletes with disabilities, especially, with Title IX, I talked in a TED Talk about this, is my fiance, he's a Paralympian, and a swimmer as well. And so he was swimming at the UMass, and because of Title IX and the way that it was kind of focused on numbers, there were so many college athletes, so there were so many men, college football athletes, so there were so many men, they have their 7th string quarterback or whatever it is. And so and there wasn't enough women, and that needed to be happened. But instead of cutting that seventh string footballer or finding an equitable way to do that, he, a marginalized person in the community, was cut from the team to make room for more women. And so by creating laws, we have to just make sure that equity is not a pie. If someone gets a bigger slice, no one else gets a smaller slice. Like, equity is for everyone, and we just have to make sure that it's baked in. And then allyship, it's called the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee, but that's only because of the past couple years, and now you all have to say it. You have to know what Paralympics are, and it's really exciting for us just to be validated in such a small but huge way. So yeah, I think it's really about that allyship and systemically making sure that no one's falling behind to make sure that others can get through that door and that door doesn't get smaller or shut.
Yeah, and to your point, right, that Title IX does not require that sports are cut. It just requires equitable opportunities, right? And the cutting of sports is a real clear indication of where priorities are within the school, right? Rather than investing more money in a women's program, they're choosing to reduce opportunities.
Yeah.
Angel, did you want to add anything in there, or?
No, that was just a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. And we know there's really great research out of the National Women's Law Center that looks at opportunities for girls of color in high school sports, and it really shows some staggering statistics about 40% of our nation's schools are either majority white or majority students of color, right? And they use that as the way to look at the opportunities provided to student athletes. So as it is, the schools that are primarily students of color are getting fewer resources, right? So there is a gender gap at all schools, but there are fewer resources going to the schools that are primarily students of color. And then when those resources are split, they're split even more inequitably than they are at the primarily white schools. So we know that's how we know that girls of color are getting shortchanged in these opportunities. And Kimora, I'm really interested to hear your perspective. Definitely seems like you have two very different ends of the spectrum here. You know, you went to a primarily white institution for high school, and now you're at Howard. For college, as a lacrosse student athlete, there are a lot of layers here to this conversation, but really would love for you to reflect on your own experience with this firsthand and the disparities that you may have witnessed.
So at my high school, I was one of two of black girls on the lacrosse team. There was about 60 of us on the JV and varsity combined, and there was only two of us. So that was definitely a struggle. I definitely did not feel accepted at my PWI. There wasn't a lot of conversations behind how the other counterparts, my white counterparts, should deal with certain situations that I may have encountered. I couldn't express myself freely, and I just didn't feel comfortable, honestly, at my high school. And then compared to now at Howard, I really just enjoy myself. I did a whole 360. I feel welcomed, accepted. Just having a community behind me, my team, they always want to support me and better myself. And I just feel a lot more comfortable to talk to them and just enjoy being around them, which is really like a good thing for me now, because being on a team, you're with your teammates every single day. So if you don't feel comfortable, it's not going to be a good season for you. It's not going to be a good experience for you compared to being welcomed, having a good time with your teammates. So definitely compared from high school to college, I really enjoy myself. I stepped out of my comfort zone. I'm able to express myself freely, wear any type of hairstyle I want without any type of judgment surrounded by me.
And just for a point of reference, in the entire Division I NCAA, black women make up, we pulled this at 3% of lacrosse student athletes. And if you were to remove HBCUs from that calculation, 2% of all women lacrosse student athletes. So we have a lot of work to do to really make sure that we are providing sports opportunities to everyone and making sure that there is access and equitable opportunities and really meaningful and engaging and inclusive environments for those opportunities as well. And as Olga alluded to earlier, we had the pleasure of being at Howard last night for a community event with some of our girl-serving organizations from the DC metro area. And it was just so inspiring to see the girls interacting, not just with our elite athletes here on the panel and in the room, but with the collegiate athletes from Howard, right? I think the best thing was there was a panel, Meghan led a panel with the athletes and opened it up to questions. All of the questions were the girls asking more information about Howard, right? They wanted to know, what sports do you offer, right? They wanted more information. It was just such a great experience to be able to see their eyes being open to what a college experience could look like for them, and hearing from the student athletes who they probably identify more closely with, right, because you're closer in age and feels attainable. The Olympic medal sometimes can be intimidating, right? So really, that was fantastic, and to have the visibility of the college student athletes and the pro athletes is really key. And Courtney, you alluded to Athletes Unlimited's model and the contract with ESPN and the greater visibility, even just outside of the College Softball World Series, which we know gets huge viewership numbers as it relates to women's sports, right? But how do you see this new model from Athletes Unlimited really impacting the reach and the fandom of softball? Do you see it kind of expanding that and the visibility and the role models that you can have, the way that you can impact?
Yeah, absolutely. Athletes Unlimited is very new. Our first season for softball was 2020, and from then we've had so much growth, and I think it's gonna continue to grow. It's also only a 6-week season, so we're in Chicago for 6 weeks, which is very different than probably any other sport or season that you've encountered. But we're also at a point where there needs to be a lot of growth financially, and we're not able to get through the year off just being paid from our sport. So this 6 weeks right now, as we continue to grow, gives us an opportunity to do something for the rest of the year. And I think Athletes Unlimited has done an amazing job. We have amazing investors, amazing partners, and to me, I only see it growing, and I hope that we can continue to grow the amount of sports we have as well.
Just as a plug for you guys, where can we find more information? Where can everyone in here find more information about it? Online?
Yeah, online. You can go
channels?
to athletesunlimited.com. We have AU Sports or AU Pro Sport on social media, and you can follow for all 4 different sports.
Fantastic. And Angel, the W has had 25 successful seasons and is still growing, right? We've seen a tremendous amount of advocacy from the athletes, leading the way for professional sports. Really, I feel like WNBA sets the standard and really shows what's possible within women's sports. What do you see on the horizon? How can fans support the effort?
Yeah, we're at 27 seasons now. I would say, I hear a lot of jokes about the WNBA, and they say, well, nobody watches the WNBA, but we're not nearly as promoted as our male counterparts. And at 27 years, we're farther along than the NBA was at 27 years. Mm-hmm. It's just a proven fact. So it goes to show that if any women's sport is promoted, that it will work. People will come to watch these girls. They want to know who they are. They want to know us. We just have to get the marketing and the promotion behind us. And I think that it is going to grow. I think all sports are going to grow. I think that now we're opening the doors for us to work together for all the sports, not just me advocating for basketball, but I want to advocate for AU and for swimming, lacrosse, because now she opened the door. We need to get more. Listen, this is America. It's a big melting pot, right? So you're going to have to work in the real workplace with different cultures anyway. So why not have, us spread out the different cultures in sports? So, I think it is evolution. It is going to get better.
And I think the conversation around promotion of professional sports, right, trickles down to college and high school.
Oh, yeah.
Is so much of what Title IX applies to, right? And Title IX does say that schools should be investing equitable resources in the promotion and investment in women's and men's teams. So really just, if we could get to that point where we felt confident that schools were complying with the law that's been around for 50 years and investing equitably and promoting equitably, imagine what's possible.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
we all saw that image at the NCAA a few years ago with the weight room. Mm-hmm. It was kind of like, how could that even be a thought? And what was it? Was it in 2020, 2021?
21.
how could that even be a thought in 2021? That just still goes to show you that the work that still needs to be done for the respect of women. These women, they lift more than men sometimes, but it just goes to show you that we believe in ourselves. So there's a lack somewhere here that needs a bridge that needs to be connected.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we saw the example of the impact of athlete advocacy with those that we wouldn't have known, right? That would not have blown up the way it did if Sedona had not posted that on TikTok as it was so simple, right? And that's how it made such an impact, is that it was easy to understand. You say, this is what the women have, and this is what the men have, right? And you can see that is not equitable. And so just that power of athletes speaking up and using their voices and using their platforms was so critical. And you saw how quickly it got changed, that it was possible to change. And that was the opportunity, right? Both men and women were in the bubble at that point. So they're not normally a side-by-side comparison. So it was the opportunity to get it right. And so they remedied it a little bit, and there's still work to be done, right? They did the gender equity review, and now the challenge is to make sure that the recommendations from that gender equity review from the NCAA are actually put into practice, right? So we can study the issues, we can study the inequities, but we need to make sure that it results in change. And I think one really great example, I'm shifting gears here a little bit away from Title IX, but the impact of athlete advocacy, I think we've seen so clearly in the fight for equal pay. And so, huge shout out to Congress for passing the Equal Pay for Team USA Act. We are so thrilled to see that get across the finish line at the end of last session. And really, we're eager to see it implemented and to really be able to help athletes understand what it means for them, to be able to see the transparency and the reporting that gets turned in, to really ensure that it's not just a piece of legislation, that it actually can make impact and make change for our athletes and athletes moving forward. And we saw that standard of the fight for equal pay, has been for a long time, right? There are many generations of women athletes who have fought for equal pay. But Meghan, your team was part of, standing up and pushing for equal treatment, equal pay. Can you talk a little bit more about that and what your experience was like and what you learned from it?
Yeah, how much time do we have? No, seriously, I very long story, and I'll try to summarize. But yeah, on the hockey side, so I'd been a member of the women's national team since about 2006, 2007 season, and my whole life I had wanted to be a part of the team. And so once I got my foot in the door, my mantra was kind of, keep your head down, right? Keep your mouth shut and just work and stay on the team and do whatever you can. And I did that for a really long time. And it got to be later in my career, I was in a leadership role, been around a long time. And, the work hard part never faltered, but, keep your head down and your mouth shut really started to change a little bit. Myself and some other leaders on our team, just over our experience on the national team and tournaments we'd been to and, games we'd played in and everything, we started having conversations around, lunch tables or on long bus rides about, the inequity between our program and the men's program. And not just, yes, there was certainly a compensation piece, that was in one bucket, but just general support too, whether it's insurance or resources, medical resources, trainers, access to proper equipment and gym use and all those types of things. And then there was other areas, marketing, PR, publicity, programming. We wanted to play more games. The men's season, they had like a 52, 55 game schedule. Ours was, 14 or something at the time. And not at all marketed properly. So there was a lot of different layers. So we started having these conversations around, and just like one tangible small example, per diem for the women's team, $15 a day, for the men, $50. So it's like our women's daily expenses that much less. I don't think so, right? So small things like that, right? And as you can imagine, so we started having these conversations, and we realized we had a case. We hired a law firm out of Philadelphia, Ballard Spar, just a true kind of equity champions. Still work with them today on both the professional women's hockey level and at the Olympic level. And we built our case around at the time, the Ted Stevens Amateur Sports Act, and had a lot of discussions behind closed doors with our national governing body of USA Hockey, probably over a 2-year period of time. Lots of meetings, sat down with them, presented some of these changes we wanted to see, thought we could do it, behind closed doors and out of the public eye and in a responsible, respectful manner, and just wasn't the case. We continued to be dismissed and disrespected, and things weren't followed up on, deadlines weren't met. And so we got to the point where, we had to do what we never wanted to do, but we knew could be an option, and we threatened to boycott the 2017 World Championship, which that year was being hosted on American soil for the first time in my entire career, which was pretty cool. So USA Hockey was about to welcome 8 nations to Michigan for the biggest tournament in a non-Olympic year without their defending gold medalists at the time. And so that really opened their eyes, I think, to how serious we were. It went very public, got picked up by, national news and everywhere. And we got, support from all the major sports organizations and all the PAs, both men and women. And in about a 10-day period of time of many more meetings, we were able to push them over the edge to kind of meet us where we wanted to be, and ended up going on playing in that tournament and winning a gold medal in front of a sold-out crowd on home soil, which was pretty cool. So that's the short version. But yeah, I mean, it was instrumental in for us, not only in for women's ice hockey, I think, but in women's sports, and the program has continued to raise the bar every year. They just entered in a new contract negotiation with even elevated support and compensation, and so continuing to raise the bar there. And I know that's when I think back over my career, and medals won and opportunities I had to play at the Olympics, all great, but the fact that we were able to really, push USA Hockey in the right direction and kind of start moving and supporting their female athletes better and really changing the landscape of hockey in our country, that's what I'm most proud of, for sure. So but it was done by a pretty fearless group of leaders on our team that all deserves a lot of credit.
Yeah, and something that you said at the top of that with the keep your head down and your mouth shut, really I think so much, right, is that what we see with athletes and athletes who bring Title IX complaints is there are plenty of issues of noncompliance across the country in schools, and it takes real egregious violations of the law for athletes to get to that point to finally feel comfortable rocking the boat and speaking up and using platforms, because we have been taught to, potentially accept the crumbs, right, and to be thankful for what we have. It's better than what came generations before us, but we really want to make sure people understand that, equity, right? It's about equity, it's about equality, it's about making sure that girls and women have those opportunities that are afforded to them by the law, and making sure that we are educating and empowering our athletes to understand the law and be willing and able to speak up and fight for change. Anna, I know we recently had a big shift and some medal payouts, perhaps not in time for your medal, but can you speak a little bit about the pay disparities that did exist for the medal payouts, but anything else in terms of equal pay as it relates to Paralympic athletes?
Yeah, it's a good question, and to kind of build off of what you were talking about, seeing women be listened to and things change means the world, because so many were not believed. It's a small example, I swam on a torn labrum for 6 months because my coach didn't believe me. And so when you see soccer and hockey, when they get to win these things, where I think women, we see so many, whether it's sexual assault or different things like that, just go by the wayside. And so being able to see women win really inspires that to keep happening. That wasn't to answer your question, but something I was thinking about. But so in the 2021 Tokyo Paralympic Games, Paralympic athletes were paid equally by 400%. is the the number of how less, 400% less is what Paralympic athletes were being paid for their medals. And so while that means an incredible amount to be validated that we are training the same amount, if not harder, in different ways, we're doing the same things and things like that. So being validated through financial means is incredible. But then if you look at the amount of collegiate programs for people with disabilities, let's get into that, and you start looking at some of those things. I mean, the work that the Women's Sports Foundation is so incredible is because of that grassroots movement. So while elite athletes are being paid for their medals, which again in 2012 they didn't do that, so back pay. But being able to make sure that there's more equity across at the grassroots level and more visibility, we've talked about that, more representation, we've talked about that. So while there are these wins, and I think the theme of the panel is we have so much more work to do, but it did validate us in a way of being like, it is the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee. We are being paid the same amount, but there's so much more to that as well. So it's exciting to see that movement keep growing.
Yeah, and as it relates to, the changes that we've seen recently in sports to really push equity forward, not just for athletes with disabilities. We've seen a tremendous push for mom athletes as well recently. 2 moms on the panel, right? And, I have a 2-year-old. I know what it takes just to go to like a regular full-time job. I can't imagine trying to also compete professionally with kids. And so would love for you both to reflect, right? Part of why the conversation is happening is that we've seen previously many women athletes were waiting until they retired to have kids, right? That having kids suddenly meant the end of your career. And now it doesn't, right? We see W putting clauses in the CBA about either parenting or planning for, egg harvesting for future, right? Giving athletes options. AU doing things to support mom athletes, really allowing for athletes to make the decision to have children during their playing careers and come back. And we've seen it, right? So many athletes are coming back even stronger, and competing at even higher levels than they may have pre-kids. So would love, Courtney, for you to talk a little bit about what those policies are like and what kind of impact it's made for you and what you hope to see, for the other athletes in the league.
Yeah. So I always thought that my career was going to be over once I wanted to have children, and that's kind of how it was set up for professional softball. And the timing was just right with AU starting up, and they reached out and said, listen, you can bring your son. We will provide a caretaker, or we will pay whoever you would like. And I'm hearing this, like, I couldn't even believe it, to be honest. And I remember, so I signed, and I remember being on a Zoom call, and we were talking about the breastfeeding and pregnancy policies. And I asked some of my teammates, like, what if someone's really uncomfortable if I'm breastfeeding in front of them? Like, what if I'm in the, which this happened multiple times, in the dugout pumping, and that's bothering someone? They're like, well, if it's bothering someone, then they can leave, or we can take care of it. And I thought, I am in the right space. Like, this is exactly how we should feel. We should feel safe. We should feel supported in this. And AU has done all of that, and I couldn't have imagined anything better than that. So my son has gotten to come with me. Luckily, we're in one location, so we don't have to do any traveling. My husband was able to be there, and we have a caregiver that helps out, and everything is taken care of. Yeah. And that's how it should be, in my opinion. Yes. Long overdue.
Yeah, and I think it's a really great example of, we've seen throughout history sports being able to lead the change, right? And so this is about sports and your ability to compete in this instance, but I think it is about so much more than sports and the ability to move the conversation forward for society and set the example of what it could look like and how we can support moms and parents in just their everyday life. Megan, what about you? Any reflections there?
Yeah, so I actually, I was one of the athletes that I didn't have kids until after I retired. I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old now, and I retired actually pretty much when I was pregnant with my son, who's 3. And but that wasn't what pushed me out. It probably was on the back of my mind a little bit, but it definitely wasn't what pushed me out. But knowing that, I think what I'm excited about was, as part of what I talked about from our fight back in 2017, was part of what we were fighting for was policies in USA Hockey for the women, like when it came to, pregnancy and childcare. None of that existed. We didn't even know that was an option to continue playing after having a child because there was no discussion about it. There was no policy. There was no support. And so one of the things we did fight for that was put in the contract for the women, at that time and now moving forward, is similar to child care policies, protection of salary, right, when you're pregnant and in, a full year after date of delivery or end of a pregnancy, really, like if a woman goes through a trauma, has a miscarriage or something like that as well, another full year protected until you're ready to return. So those types of things to support, women of childbearing years to not have to choose, right? And so I think that's so incredibly important. And then now in my kind of, post-hockey life, being a part of different things, whether it's, the work that, Allison Felix has done, like in her space, or the work that Alicia Montoya has done in the running space. And I recently, participated in the New York City Marathon, and that day at the expo, and I think some of the other staffers in here probably saw it, there was Alicia Montoya had her area set up. There was a breastfeeding center. There was things all along the course at the race. If you need to stop, if you need to pump, here's a area where you can stop. I think the world is more aware now, right? And we, for so long, all of us, as we've been talking about today, have lived in the sports world dominated by men. And men they didn't think about that, right? Not to fault them, but like it doesn't affect their bodies or all those things, right? So now that we're starting to have these conversations, educate, male leaders too on the importance of some of these policies, it's exciting to see. And I know I'm seeing the fruits of it on the women's hockey side. There are women that have had children and now are coming back to play because they had the option and the support and the policies in place. And there are women running marathons pregnant. Like, that is unbelievable to me, right? And so it's exciting to see, and hope to see it continue to be something that's discussed and talked about and implemented in all industries.
Yeah, and huge shout out to Alicia Montano and Mother that is doing super impressive work to really move that conversation forward around childcare for athletes and more broadly society. So I want to leave a few minutes hopefully for Q&A if anyone has, or if there are any on the live stream. So I want high level, right, between yesterday and today. We had the girls' clinic at Howard. We had many, many congressional meetings, and we've talked about lots of different things. Would love to know, from all of the conversations and things we've done this week to celebrate National Girls and Women in Sports Day, but really continue the conversation about how we can keep Title IX strong, how we can continue advancing gender equity in sports. From each of you, what are your main takeaways? What's your main highlight from this week?
I can start off. I think being at the at Howard University yesterday, seeing the girls, the impact of seeing incredible collegiate athletes with the girls. They kind of come in shy. They're like, oh my God, what the heck is lacrosse? Like, never heard of it. Basketball, am I too short? Whatever. And, Angel and everyone being able to be like, you got this, girl. But then at the end, with softball, just seeing some of the girls just lob these balls like across this basketball court was just incredible to see them come out of their shell. And it really just kind of brings to life this mission. We've talked about it, but being able to be in these grassroots movements on the ground with the Women's Sports Foundation, and like the effects of just being encouraged are just instant. And these girls, just from like the 2 hours we had with them, something like that, they were completely different. They were confident, and I hope they never lose it. One girl was we were doing some kind of race, and she kept going. We were only doing half court, and she ran just fully, very confidently all the way around behind everyone. Fully knew what she was doing around, just to prove that she was like strong and tough. And so seeing that impact was incredible, and like why we're all here today.
I would say the main thing that stuck with me yesterday was the mental health aspect with a lot of the girls. I think a lot of the girls, kind of similar to what you said, they felt like they couldn't speak up. Mm-hmm. And I was like, wow, you never know that these girls feel like they don't have the voice. Mm-hmm. And that's how Title IX came about. Someone spoke up. And I think, that's the one thing that, we had to tell them was like, always get a mentor. I know you said, told them get a mentor. You can find someone to talk to, find someone who's been there, done that in your shoes. Talk to your coach. I know that, with sports, from what I've seen growing up, women's sports girls do get punished a little bit more, probably than the male counterparts. I've seen one coach, when I was overseas, he pulled a girl hair just because she got the play wrong. You know what I mean? So it's one of those things where the mental health aspect in our sport, we already feel that we're not getting the equality, right? But then our girls are quiet at the same time. So I think us really encouraging them, telling them they have a voice, speak up. You can say whatever it is that's on your mind. One girl came to me crying yesterday. She felt like she had so much pressure on her. And I said, hey, you haven't said anything? She said, no. I said, talk to your coach. That's what a coach is for. Tell them, hey, it's a lot on me right now, or maybe I need a day off. I don't even think girls feel like they can tell a coach they need a day off. Remember we were talking about yesterday. You can have that mental break day.
Yeah.
So you won't lose it in the sport that you love and, you're going so hard for. So that's one of the main things that stuck with me yesterday.
Yeah.
I think this moment right here, us just being able to have conversations, you all showing up here, wanting to learn, us being able to share our stories, people on the live stream, this is so important. And we all have a voice, and to be able to share it with like-minded people and amazing women who have been through it. This is great.
2 stories from yesterday that I just loved, similar to what she
So
said.
is
There
the
was,
girls.
Yeah,
It's
like one
yeah.
little 6-year-old girl, first time ever picking up a lacrosse stick, threw it successfully to the Howard player that was standing there, turned up to her dad who was in the stands, and she looked right at him, Dad, I'm about to go pro.
I love that.
And I'm like, that's amazing, right? And then later on in the similar session, I was catching up with some of the older girls. They were more, preteen kind of in that 12, 13, and just talking about how fun it was to play basketball and look at these. The Washington Mystics supplied nice official WNBA basketballs to all the girls that came yesterday, and so one of the girls talking about, I want to go to a Mystics game. When do they play? And I was like, well, I don't know their schedule off the top of my head, but I was like, you should, and it just it's just exciting. That's what it's about. That's why we do what we do. That's how I was inspired. Watching hockey back in the Olympics, as the representative said earlier, and that's so fun to see it come full circle. And with that being said, I challenge all of you too to buy a ticket to a Mystics game or a sport game. Or, that's how you can support women's sports too, right? Go.
Yeah.
Buy a ticket. I just thought those were 2 great stories to share.
That's fantastic. Kimora, how about you?
I think unity is key. Honestly, just seeing so many successful women in this room throughout the day, I believe if we all come together as one with women, that we can help each other out, network, connect, and continue to grow throughout unity and women's sports.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we see so frequently is the power of sports and where it takes women in their lives and their careers and the leadership, right? It is fantastic to see athletes succeeding at the most elite levels, but it's also, the women in Congress who have played sports. It's our friends in the back Capitol Police who, have played sports and, are now leading and keeping us safe. Thank you for that. We've seen tremendous, women who are capable of so much and owe so much of their leadership skills to what they've learned through sport. So really fantastic. Okay, we have a few minutes if there are any questions. Wanted to open the floor. And I'll look at my team if there's anyone from the live stream if there are any questions. Nothing yet. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
What kind of professional sports team? I mean, I know a lot of conversations around time, but how can professional teams continue to be good advocates, right? And to do that education around and
Yeah, so, and I'll repeat for the live stream folks, the question was about how can the professional teams really continue advancing Title IX, right, and putting that forward. I would say helping to educate, right? You have such a platform and you have an audience. And so we have the knowledge, we have the expertise, but you have reach and you have the ability to kind of spread that message forward. And also, I mean, we saw Michelle Kang, Washington Spirit, took out a full-page ad in the New York Times to get equal pay for Team USA, to promote that and push for the passage of that. So there is the ability to really get behind legislation that's going to move the needle forward for gender equity in sports. I don't know from the athletes if there's anything from your perspective that you've seen.
I would say the visibility. Everywhere we turn, every corner, people know the Mystics. I think them knowing the storytelling, them getting to know the girls personally. What are their stories? What are their backgrounds? Where are they from? Who are these girls on this Mystics team? So I think that visibility is key. I want to see, little girls and little boys wearing those Mystics jerseys. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes.
We just have a question on the live stream about male allies and how we can help them help us.
Question on the live stream about how can we reach male allies and how can we help them help us?
Shout out to all the male allies in the room today. Thank you guys. Thank you guys for being here. Yeah. So often, we're part of conversations about women in sport or, women in industries, and you look around the room and it's all women, which I love. We're passionate about it, right? But we need men. We need the support, and we need male allies to step up, in a room and stick up for their female counterparts. So I think male allies show up, like the fellas in the room today, show up. And ask questions. Again, it goes back to the education piece. I'm sure you guys maybe learned one or two things today that you can think about and that you didn't know, and share with your male counterparts. So I think just showing up, asking questions, being involved in the conversation, wanting to learn more about what Title IX is, or what one of your female colleagues or your sister or your mother's experience was. I think that's critical. And so being able to, like any of us, see the world through someone else's perspective, and through their eyes. So educate yourself, and then don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to stand up, and stand by the women in your life.
And I would also say for the male allies who get it and who are champions, bring other men along. Right? Is that so often we're sitting in rooms and we are preaching to the choir, and we had, an intimate breakfast earlier this week and had a man who said, I was sitting here and I was thinking about how I should have brought different people with me, and the immediate people that he thought of were the women who work in his department. And he said, they get it. As he sat there and as he listened, he was like, but they get it and they know, and that's preaching to the choir. And I really needed to bring the men on my staff to have them come and hear this conversation. So for those of you who are here, we appreciate you. And bring more people next time, right? And allow others to hear the conversation, because I think that's what often is missing, is the ability to reach outside of those who already get it.
Yeah, because we do need you guys, and it's you guys who help our game, to be taken seriously. And honestly, we have more male viewers in the WNBA. It's you guys, and we depend on you. We appreciate you. And I have a funny story. I was at a restaurant. And I was inviting a guy to a game. And I said, come to a WNBA game. I'll give you a ticket. He's like, why should I come watch the WNBA? He's like, do you jump as high as LeBron? I said, no. He's like, do you run as fast as LeBron? I said, no. He said, so why should I come? I said, sir, I run faster and I jump higher than you. Yeah. And he was like, all right, I'll come. So, sometimes you got to give him a little challenge,
Oh, that's fantastic. I love it.
I'll add
Yeah.
I think just those simple conversations can be so powerful. My husband plays basketball, and he called me the other day, and he's definitely an ally, and he better be representing in the locker room. But he called me. He's like, okay, I don't know if you're wanting to have this deep conversation right now, but what do you think about the WNBA lowering the rims? How do you think this is going to affect them? Like all these things, right? And I'm like, okay. First of all, I'm so happy that he's invested, because he watches. Like we've gone to a bunch of games in Chicago, like any city we've gone to WNBA games, softball games, all that. But those type of conversations, that draws people in. Like you get to learn more about the sport, and it's important. So it could be the smallest conversations that make a big impact.
Yeah, and I always tell them, I say, hey, if you don't like it, I'll refund your ticket. Don't worry about it. I haven't had to refund the ticket yet. So once they're in, they're hooked. We just got to get them in there.
And buy tickets.
Right, exactly. And I think that's a really good point about him being in the locker room and spaces that we can't go in. It's carrying this conversation through. It shouldn't be up to people with disabilities to talk about disability. It shouldn't be talking about hair discrimination up to Black women. It should be on the allies to bring this through. It's not just bringing people into this conversation, but bringing this conversation into places that normally this isn't going to be talked about.
Yeah, that's very, very accurate, very true. Couldn't have said it better, Anna. Thank you. Any other questions from the room? Yeah.
Okay, so I'm a senior reporter for Sports Illustrated Kids, so I just have questions regarding the next generation. Like, all of you on the panel, like, what do you feel are the most important actionable steps in the next year to grow, the coverage, but also to expand for the next generation the opportunities that you guys are talking about?
So question from Anna with Sports Illustrated Kids, just looking to find out more about the next generation. How do we help them move the ball forward? What are the opportunities and the visibility and viewership?
I'd say social media is the biggest platform, especially for college and high school students. We're always on our phones. We're on TikTok, Instagram, even Twitter. So I believe that us using our social platforms, the influencers out there that play sports, this will gain the most coverage for women's sports.
I was going to say, I think Gen Z and they're not having it. That's the good thing about it. So just keep fighting those fights. Don't lose that passion. I think when you get older, you tend to lose it. You get beat down by the world. We've all been there, right? When you think about, I wanted to be an astronaut, right? Where did that dream go? So bringing that passion with young kids and young athletes, really just not letting it go, and then using your social platforms. Follow more women in sports. Follow more athletes with disabilities. And so, I think it's a combination of all that.
Yeah, for sure. Keep the fire, but spread it, right? And teach others, right? Those who don't know, similar, right, Megan? I didn't know a ton about Title IX when I was growing up, and when I was in my true sports experiences. It wasn't only until I started working for the Women's Sports Foundation that I fully understood the full extent of the law and looked back at some past experiences going, I wonder what I would have done had I had the knowledge, right? So really just encouraging you all to get educated and share that education, share that knowledge, share the conversation with others who may not be in the room, and bring them along. With that, just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. Thank you to those tuning in from the live stream, and happy National Girls and Women in Sports Day.
They won't hear our private conversations. Right. I'm gonna get your email or something.
We did it. 2 for 2. Oh my God. It shouldn't be this hard.
I have a lot of complaints and I don't really want to report them to the people here, but it's just I guess it's like everyone's pointing fingers.